you that ask, hey, if I miss one of these, is it available? Always just go to our Lead Up for Women page, and you can always watch the videos from there as well. So let me first introduce Becky while she's getting everything set up. So Becky and I actually met quite a few years ago when I moved into my community, Eastmark. It's been, gosh, I think it's been almost 5 years that we met. It's been a long time. And I moved into this great community of mine because I wanted to have the ability to have a contribution to a community and not just drive into your driveway, park into your garage, shut your garage, never talk to your neighbors, which is how I felt it was in my past place that I lived. And this is like a town out here, and they do so much for family and community and getting together. And Becky and I actually attended a leadership class together, and it was that leadership class that moved me so much that I felt this pull to be an entrepreneur and leave corporate America. And I did. I was tired of driving out of this beautiful community at dark 30 in the morning and driving back in at dark 30 at night, feeling like I was missing the reason why I was living here. So now Becky and Becky is actually the first community member that lives as a resident here that's on the board. She's the very first one that's been voted in. So congratulations, Becky, on that. And so we connected very quickly. Her and I work out together. She's an attorney. She's part of Lead Up for Women. She's been at some of my events for sanctuaries. She's been at the lunch and learns when we used to do them in person. And Becky is just outstanding in what she does. She's helped my husband and I with estate planning. And so I'm really excited to have her here today because I feel like she was right there on that cusp of my life where everything was changing. And I moved from corporate America to being an entrepreneur. And Becky did the same thing. I remember the text message I got the day when she was like, yeah, so lost my job, what now? And I was like, awesome, build your own business. Let's do this. And she did. She built her own business. And so it's just so exciting to watch female entrepreneurs take a situation that maybe someone else would have drowned in and taken it as a positive, like, hey, I've got this. I can do anything in my life that I want to do. And it's my choice. So that was really fun. And we bonded a lot over that as well. So Becky, I'm going to go ahead and let you take the floor and introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you and take it from here.
Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Becky Easton with Easton Law Estate and Business Planning. And as Colleen mentioned, live out here in Mesa, right down the street. We actually, the first lot that we ever signed on, we would have been like neighbors within a few houses. But we ended up across the street about half a mile away. But yeah, I have to echo all of those sentiments about this neighborhood and just how wonderful it's been. I don't know. I never really wanted to go to law school. I grew up on Law and Order, right? And so I thought all you did was argue, which, I mean, don't get me wrong. I do appreciate a good argument, but not all the time, you know? And so I don't know, I realized one day that transactional attorneys were a thing. I'd always liked reading fine print. I liked contracts, you know, weird things like that. Everyone's got their thing. But yeah, I realized that transactional attorneys were a thing and I could understand, I don't know, just more difficult things and drill it down and help other people understand and feel comfortable about that. And so, you know, estate and business planning fell right in there. You know, it is ultimately, you know, contracts with yourself and your family and contracts with yourself and your business partners and your vendors and all of that. That's so, so important. So, yeah, about just over 3 years ago, in July, I founded, well, I guess it's still July. So yeah, just over 3 years ago, founded Easton Law, and this community has been nothing but supportive. So it's been just really, I don't know, fabulous. You know too, like you've seen all the wonderful support here. But again, like just being able to build a business with, you know, women entrepreneurs and all of that, it's just really nice. So so yeah, so it's been fun. So I guess I'm going to talk to you. Let's see, are we able to get the slideshow up from my other from my other account that's logged in?
So you can try to flip on your video to see if it'll share. If not, you can send it to me and I can share
Oh,
my
sure.
screen. You can always just email
Okay.
it to me and I'll pull it up and share my
Okay.
screen. So you
Yeah.
could do that very quickly if you want first while you're trying to figure it out, and then I can get the email and share it.
Okay.
Either way,
Can
it
you
works.
make my other account a co-host?
Yeah. So I will
Then
right
I should
now.
be able to share.
Oh,
Hang
there we
on.
go. Try that.
Bam. Yay.
Perfect. It
All
worked.
right. Love it. All right, guys. So, welcome. I'm so glad you guys are all here. We're going to talk a little bit about estate planning and particularly talking about professional women and why it is particularly important for you to be thinking about it, and because it's going to affect you in more ways than you know. Let's see. I kind of told you a little bit already about me. I grew up in Arizona. I went to law school in Denver, and I really loved it out there, and the tide kind of kept rising, and we ended up coming back out here to Phoenix, and ended up in Mesa. I kind of challenged my husband to find a job, and I would transfer, and ended up working. I found my home here with pardon me, I don't know why I can't think it, an HOA law firm. And, I don't know, it was really interesting, just ultimately not really what I wanted to be doing. I didn't really feel like I was helping anybody. And when, I had the opportunity to then step out and form Easton Law, it really is about this question: what happens if something happens to you? Not everybody wants to be thinking about their own death, but it's better for you to be thinking about it on the front end than for us to be working on it on the back end, right? So let's see. All right, so things that I'm going to be talking about today are the state's plan for you and why you might not like that, why some of those simple form documents aren't going to work and what you might want instead, and then also what your next steps are if you want to make sure that you and your family are going to be well taken care of. So I'll refer you out to our needs assessment, which is out there online. You can pull it up in a separate tab or just pull it up after the fact and go through it and just make some notes while we're talking. But that's just bit.ly/EL purple sheet. Just as we're going through, just you'll be able to kind of note some of the things that perk up your ears and make you think about whether you need to get in touch with us to talk about a little bit more, or whether you already have everything all set up, which would be awesome. So some of these basics: do you have an estate plan? The answer is yes. Whether you've thought about it or not, you absolutely do have an estate plan because the state has already decided on one for you. So a lot of times this ends up causing problems because, for example, Arizona, if you die without a will and you have a spouse and kids, typically we're going to see it going to your assets go to a surviving spouse. They go down to your kids if you have no surviving spouse. And then if you don't have any children, then that's where we kind of are looking up and out to find the closest related family to you. And that's how you end up with a check from your third Uncle Jimmy that you've never heard of, but you were the closest living relative, And so the state does have a plan for you. And even when it comes to like guardianship and conservatorship over adults and children. So they've decided what that should look like. And even if you think you have done some estate planning, that it can end up not really serving you in the way that you thought it was going to. So like, for example, here, my grandma is really a good example. Oh, let's see, someone's just telling me that we need permission to see the purple sheet. I will get back to you on that. So just make some notes for right now and I'll circle back around on that. Sorry, guys. So let's see. what was I saying? Oh, talking about my grandma was a good example here. She had a trust. We all knew she had a trust. She talked to us about it. And then when she died, she hadn't really put anything into it. And so it was just kind of this vehicle sitting around that wasn't really doing anything for her and didn't actually make anything any easier than, she hoped it was going to. And so also, we don't really want to leave a mess. Estate planning ultimately is that process of making sure that everything that is going, making sure that your family, your team, and your clients don't have a mess to deal with when something happens to you. So we typically think of estate planning with regard to, passing away. What happens when I die? What happens to all my stuff when I'm not here? But it is also largely about your incapacity. So what is it that happens? I note that it works now, so good. So estate planning, is so also about your incapacity. So one thing that you certainly can't plan for, even if you know that you're not going, we don't know when you're going to die. We certainly don't know when you're going to be in a car accident, or you're going to go hiking and a rock is going to fall away from underneath you and you're going to fall. And we can't plan for any of that. And without any sort of planning in place, then, other people are left kind of picking that up, figuring out what it is that you would want to do, And so on the front end, you're doing it for them, you're doing your estate planning so your family doesn't have to guess. So your friends don't have to guess. This is particularly important, when we're talking about single ladies, divorced women, anyone who doesn't have that automatic surviving spouse who is, that default person who is able to make decisions for you. You end up perhaps with people that you wouldn't want making a decision for you. So the 5 basic documents that protect us and help create that ease for your loved ones are a will, trust, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and then also that kids protection plan. So a will is that legal document which tells the court what happens to your stuff when you die. So everything that's owned in your personal name, it has to be transferred either by you or by order of the court. So that is essentially what a will is doing. There are some situations where, depending on how much you have in assets, and it varies around the states, that you can have, and then without having to go through an actual probate estate, you can usually file affidavits. And again, this kind of varies in every state, but essentially, a will is telling the court what to do with all of your stuff. A trust then is a contract between the trustor, which is the person making the trust, and the trustee, which is the person who's going to be in charge of those assets in the trust. And that's for the benefit of one or more of the beneficiaries. And so that can, if you're creating the trust, all 3 positions could be you to start. You're making the trust, you're going to manage all your trust assets for the benefit of you and whoever else you decide. So that powers of attorney after that, both for finances and for your healthcare, are your naming agents who can make those decisions for you in the event that you're unable to. So with that power of attorney for your finances, that's handling anything with regard to real property, personal property, or money. So being able to access bank accounts, being able to pay bills. A financial power of attorney comes in really, it becomes really important when we're talking about making life insurance payments. So I recently had well, not a client, but a friend of mine who the husband passed away suddenly, well, not suddenly, I apologize, let me back up. I'm confusing two different clients. It was a mom. So mom passed away. She was a little bit sick for a while. She was in the hospital for a few weeks, and there was a life insurance payment that was missed while she was there. And the family kind of tried to make the payments. They reached out, but they wouldn't talk to them because they didn't have the appropriate authority. And so they ended up with a big kind of mess on their hands, expecting all this life insurance. And then, of course, now they want to deny the claim because that insurance payment hasn't been made. So, and then when it comes to your healthcare, right? Anytime you're unable to make decisions on your own, how do you want those to be made? And so this isn't necessarily, I mean, we think about this most commonly when it comes to, life support and being kept alive on artificial, hydration, food and fluids, on a respirator even. That's now even more important with COVID. But what is it that you want that to look like? So we think about that first. But also, what are your personal beliefs with regard to the food that you eat? Are you vegan? Do you keep vegetarian? Are there other important things? For example, are you a Jehovah's Witness and you would never accept a blood transfusion? Or things like that are extremely important as well, because in the absence of any of that information, doctors are just going to do the best they can, the best that they know how to, which isn't necessarily going to be what you want at all. And so then with that kids protection plan, this is another thing that differentiates our firm a little bit from the average estate planning firm, is that we're also thinking about this kids protection planning from an outside perspective. We're really wanting to make sure that we're covering parents. So typically you'll see a guardian nomination done in someone's will, and that's great, because if you die, when your kids are minors, we want to make sure that we have that guardian named who can step in and take care of them. However, your will is only good if you're dead. So what if you're simply in the hospital? What if right now kids are going back to school right now? What if there's an accident, your kids need to be registered in school, need to receive some health care, but you are not able to do that because now you're in the hospital, or something else is going on. So who is it who has that actual authority to take care of your kids for you? And I mean, even with, let's talk, I think I probably have this on the next slide. Yeah, so talking a little bit, I touched on some of these. So what happens kind of without planning is, without those proper healthcare directives, your family may end up having to go to court to access those medical records and make any kind of decisions for you. This comes into play particularly with unmarried or LGBTQ families, where you may or may not be legally married. Who is it who's able to get in, access those medical records, make decisions for you? The default could be those wrong people, if you will. We could have your parents making decisions, and maybe they're wholly unsupportive of your lifestyle, and wanting them to make those decisions for you may not be what you want, right? You may prefer a friend, or just someone else, right? And very similar with your with your finances, as I talked about. Without a power of attorney, your family ends up having to go to court to access your bank accounts and pay those bills. Like I mentioned with life insurance, we need to make sure those payments are being made, right? So that the life insurance is going to work for you when the time comes. And so, again, here, when we're thinking about, finances, so those wrong people could be that ex that you haven't quite left all the way. He's still on that bank account, and you're trying to drag him along and get his, get his support in, taking care of things, making payments, accessing funds. And similarly, friends, like parents, who is going to step in to, try to be able to make these decisions for you? And are they necessarily the people that you want doing that? Oh, sorry. I'm going the wrong way, guys. There we go, without a will. So then when you're dying without a will, like I mentioned again before, the state has that plan for you. So, if perhaps, we're talking about unmarried couples here, you would far prefer for your assets to go to your partner or to your partner's children or to, whoever it is that you want to have your stuff, to a charity, right? The state already has a plan for you. No one knows any of that information. And so it ends up where your parents are responsible for administering your estate, or, perhaps your siblings. And, let's say we don't even have any living family that we can find, or no one who will step up and take care of it. Then we may end up having the court have to appoint, a financial guardian over things. And again, that just gets expensive, guys. And this is one way to put a little bit of, forethought into it, and, not have to put your family through these situations, right? Do the thinking on the front end, and ensure, here it's talking about having to qualify for a bond. This is one really interesting thing that kind of gets into a catch-22 sometimes. You have someone who needs to access funds in order to be able to pay for the bond, but they cannot access, or they can't pay the bond until they can access the funds. And so you end up in a little bit of that catch-22 there sometimes. And then furthermore, when you're dying only with a will, as I mentioned, that is really just instructions for the court as to what they should. I'm stumbling over my words this morning. Really just instructions to the court as to what should happen with all the things that are in your personal name, right? So if you die with just a will without a trust that is holding that real estate and investment accounts for you, your family ends up in probate to transfer those assets. Anything that doesn't have a beneficiary designation, we're thinking about here. And the problem with probate is time, money, public, and it's out of your control, right? So time, here in Arizona, you're looking at least a year, even for a relatively simple probate. Money, you're talking about 5% of your assets is not an outrageous amount to have to pay when all said and done with your probate estate. And depending on where you are in the nation with these real estate prices going through the roof, you probably have a whole lot of equity in your house right now. And so that, if you're in a state where that is the case, then you could very easily end up in probate when you feel like you don't have very many assets. Probate is also public, guys. Everything that you file with a court is a public document, and I can go in and request it. You can go in and request it. Literally anyone can. And so we hear stories about con artists and finding out who just got a big lump sum of money. This is how they do it. And so they just pull public records and find out how much you had when you died, who your beneficiaries were, and what they got. And while that may not matter to everybody, those are the reasons that we can pull up like Lisa Marie Presley's will and take a look at it, right? And then furthermore, as far as it being out of control, there are so many different factors that come into play when we're talking about money and involving the court system and other people making decisions. There's a lot of factors. We talked about, perhaps your family has to qualify for a bond. there may be creditors, creditors out there that, are making claims that you don't have kind of that same control of. And when that money also gets distributed out to your family, it's directly in their arms. So there's nothing saying how they're using it, for what purpose, and nothing to protect your family or your beneficiaries from any sort of creditor, a divorce, or a bankruptcy, and all of those funds being sucked into that as well. And then, as we were talking about this kids protection planning, ladies, this is important for the moms out there. If you have minor kids at home, practically speaking, if you don't make it home one night, if you and your husband or you and your partner are out and don't come home, what is it that happens? Where do your kids go? Who does the babysitter call at that point in time? And who is it who has that legal authority? Here's where I was talking about making sure that you have guardians named in documents outside of your will, because at this point you might not be dead. We just don't know where you are, right? And so in this horrendous scenario, we're envisioning the babysitter is at home with your children, and the cops knock on the door, and they're looking for you, or they're advising that there's been some accident. Well, the babysitter probably doesn't have legal authority. They're not going to leave your kids with a 16-year-old. So making sure that we have those documents outside of that, where you have temporary guardians who can step in, you have your permanent guardians who have separate documentation, and so they're able to really take care of you, or take care of your children when you're not able to, right? And also young adult kids. Ladies, there's so much, like I said, here for us to think about. Young adult kids, as soon as you are 18, you're an adult in the eyes of the law, and all of the decisions that you are making are your own. And so, your parents aren't going to the doctor with you anymore. They aren't, if you get a new bank account, they're not, the parents aren't on there with you. And without those specific legal documents in place, you as the parent don't have any access to their medical records or their bank accounts to help them out if anything goes wrong. And so, really that last thing that you really want to be dealing with in a time of stress where your child has been injured somehow in some accident, the last thing you want to be dealing with is having to go to court to try to sort that out just so you can help your child. And then how about your parents? Who's going to be taking care of that, if they have not done the appropriate planning? It's going to be you. It's going to be someone else in your family who is going to have to deal with that. Potentially getting stuck, going to court, trying to get access to those records, make those medical and financial decisions, or even ending up in court after their death. How many people, I think we've all heard a story or three about a family who really thought that there was planning in place. Dad had done it all. And, let's think back to my grandma, right? My grandma had done it all. And we knew, and fortunately for us, my mom is an only child, so we didn't get stuck in court too badly. But we did for a couple of things, like transferring my house that, she was on, helped me buy my first house and was on the title with me. And we did end up having to go to court to deal with that, because it was just something that didn't really come to mind at first. And because she had not fully done her planning or, kept it updated throughout the years, we ended up with a big mess at the end. And I was part owner of a house with my mom now. So let's see. This opportunities for lifetime asset protection. Here, I mentioned a little bit ago that once you receive assets and they are yours, then they are open to you spending them on yourself, of course, blowing it on extravagant vacations and cars, giving it all away to other people, all of that, or like I mentioned earlier too, like creditors and lawsuits and things like that. All that money, anything that is owned in your personal name, is subject and available for them to reach. So this asset protection, when you're receiving an inheritance or you're receiving money from someone that has never been yours, you're able to put it into this lifetime asset protection style trust where that money is protected in those situations, and you can build up sort of that barrier between you and this inheritance in order to protect you going on down the line. So why is it that we're not going to be able to rely on these cheap forms from, online forms or, just attorney pricing? Think of that. And it's because estate planning isn't something that is doing you necessarily. It's for those people that you love. You're to make sure that you're not a mess behind for them. You're taking care of your family in the way that you would if if you were still alive. That's the point there. And so, working with an attorney who focuses only on forms, or, you just fill out the questionnaire and then get the documents, right? This is the same experience that you have online. It's not necessarily going to be working for you the way you think it is. I've reviewed several plans for people, and I can always see the good faith effort in there, and I can understand what each one has been trying to do, but they've all been slightly incorrect in little ways that completely change the meaning of the documents, and that's not what you want, right? You want to make sure that your plan is going to work for you when you want. So again, thinking about my grandma, right? Her plan did not work at all. I mean, again, with an only child, it kind of got down to work out the way it was supposed to, but it wasn't the way she intended it for my mom to be a co-owner of my house with me. She would have probably wanted to just leave that to me, or maybe we could have just taken care of that ahead of time. But we didn't think about it. She wasn't working with an attorney that she had an ongoing relationship with, who was asking the questions of, what's going on in your life? Like, what's new? Have you co-signed on any houses with your grandchildren lately? So things that you want your attorney to include, right? You want to be sure that your attorney is educating you, giving you all kinds of choices, and making sure that they're not creating some sort of one-size-fits-all plan for you. Because although people's scenarios can be very similar, then it's just not one-size-fits-all, guys. Everything is a little bit different. You're all going to care slightly differently about what's important to you, and if you don't understand the different, you don't have to completely understand, right? But if you don't see how the different choices work, whether it's planning simply with wills and powers of attorney, or whether you're wanting to step up and get some extra protection through the vehicle of a trust, that's a decision that you should be making for yourself. Another thing about our firm is that, we do everything on a flat fee basis. I want you guys to call, right? When I was working in firms prior to this, I realized that the client, well, it wasn't necessarily the clients, but the people I was working with were afraid to call because I was charging them. And, I'm on the opposite side. So of course our clock is always running. But, it was kind of crushing because I knew that these people just needed help and they just needed some questions answered. And, what's 6 minutes of my time to answer a couple of questions for someone, and I mean, the answer to that is, it turns out that's like $25 at the time that they got to pay me for asking one question. And I hate that. I want my clients to call in. I want them to ask questions. Leading into this regular plan updating, as things are going on, all of you wonderful professional women out here, so many things are happening in your life. You are learning and growing and building a business and creating wonderful things for yourself. Your family is growing and changing, and that whole dynamic is different from, year to year. All of these things, as they're happening, you're buying properties, you're selling properties, you're moving across the nation into a different country. All kinds of things are happening to you right now, and that's awesome. But if we're not updating a plan, then it really quickly gets outdated and isn't necessarily going to work for you when the time comes, right? So also creating a family wealth inventory. This is probably the number one thing that you ladies can all do right away. You can go to, let's see, I don't remember the website off the top of my head, but I've got it in here later. You can go in and fill out our personal resource map. And this will go through, it has you thinking about generally just your demographic information, but then also what is it that's important to you? What are the things that you would want to leave behind that are more than just, your physical wealth, if you would? What's your spiritual capital? What's your human capital that you want to be passing down and sharing that? And then inventorying, your assets, right? So where are those accounts? There are over $58 billion with a B in unclaimed property across the United States. Here in Arizona, it's what, 16? It's like a ridiculous amount, 15 billion. Just lost money that's out there. And actually, I kind of encourage you to go out there, whatever state you're in or whatever state you've lived in, just search that state and unclaimed property and search for your name and see what happens. I actually just jokingly did this with a friend of mine. He was joining me for lunch, and I was finishing up an unclaimed property claim for a client. And I was like, oh, hey, have you heard of the Department of Unclaimed Property? Like, let's see if you have anything there. And I found him 5 accounts. 5. And, that's just money that was just sitting there waiting for him, right? Just waiting for him to claim. These family wealth legacy interviews, I was talking a little bit about your spiritual capital and your human capital, and how else is anybody going to know about that unless we're talking about it? So this is one of the other the special things about working with Easton Law or other personal family lawyers who are out there, is that we do these family wealth legacy interviews. And so we're talking to you, giving you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about your kids, your spouse. How did you meet? What's important to you, the values that you have. I actually just recently did one for myself on talking about pets, and it's just a series of like interview questions that we go through and talk about, and what's important in your life there. And so that way you're passing that down. You're passing down those stories, you know, you're passing down your tone of voice and your inflection as you're telling it. So it's one way to leave something much more exciting for your family. And then also that kids protection planning, right? We want to make sure that we're thinking about protecting your kids outside of a will as well, because they need help, whether, you know, you don't have to have passed away for them to need, you know, your help. And all right, ladies, so where might you be unconsciously at risk? So either you've done no planning or directives at all, or it's been more than 3 years and you've had some major life changes since that plan was created. You might not have an ongoing relationship with a lawyer. So, you know, here is it, who is it that you call in an emergency when you have those questions? You know, what is going to happen to my kids? How do I make sure they're protected because XYZ has now happened? And not having that inventory of financial assets that I was talking about, or planning for your kids properly, you know, ultimately just leaving all of that up in the air, and having other people, you know, having other people have to make those decisions for you. And then lastly, this no coordination of planning between generations. This is a really interesting thing that I think women are uniquely set up to be thinking about. How do we create an intergenerational wealth, as opposed to simply leaving funds to your kids to spend on whatever outright at, you know, certain ages or whatnot? What if you can build in a legacy and use those same funds still for your child's benefit, you know, even your adult child's benefit, even if they're not receiving any of this until they're 50 plus? You know, being able to build in some amount of protection for those assets, but also, you know, kind of plan and include them in your planning. So, you know, we're able to build something bigger and pass down something bigger than we all are. And here, what to do if you are at risk. So I'm going to refer back to that purple sheet. Oh, well, it's not purple because you're doing it online. If it were printed out, it would be purple. So we want to go back to that needs assessment. And so again, that was a bit.ly link, bit.ly/EL purple sheet. And click through and just think about some of those areas where you may be at risk here. So come in for a family wealth planning session. Sit down with my firm. Again, Easton-Estate and Business Planning. My information will be up here again in just a minute. But sit down with us and let us figure out what your plan looks like right now. Because again, as I mentioned, the state does have a plan for you. And we will also ensure that you leave with a healthcare directive as my gift. And so I'm licensed here in Arizona. And so I'm not able to obviously provide legal services for everybody out there, but that doesn't mean that this planning session can't happen. We can absolutely sit down and talk about where those certain holes are. I do have a large network of other personal family lawyers. And so almost every state, I think we've got someone who is able to assist you. I can refer you out to as well. But this initial planning, reviewing your assets and sitting down and discussing what's important to you, that can happen, you know, by Zoom from anywhere for you. And so this part of the homework that you do on the front end for that is that inventory of your assets. And we pull that together for you after the fact, so that then, you know, you and your family have everything that you need when that time comes. And then, you know, if your plan has any holes, we can help you design a plan to fill that. And like I said, if you're not here in Arizona where I can help you, then, you know, we can help you find an attorney in your state. So these family wealth planning sessions, they're normally $750, guys, but because you were here and you've come here through Lead Up for Women, you get the session completely for free, as long as you go through and complete that purple worksheet. Not purple, again, I got to change that wording. So you get the session for free. And I'll also throw in that healthcare directive. I am able to get those from other states as well. So this applies for everybody. And so you'll go ahead and submit that online, and you will be able to receive that family wealth planning session for free. And then also, if you, let's see, it says today, but if you secure your session with me and tell me you're with Lead Up for Women within the next, couple of weeks, I know people are going to be watching this on a replay. Just let me know that you guys came through Lead Up for Women, and we'll give you that additional $250 off any additional legal work we decide to do after that. And next up, fill out that needs assessment. Schedule some time with me. You've got another bit.ly link /consult with Becky to hop on my calendar for 15 minutes whenever works for you. Even if it's just to hop on and say hey and meet another fabulous Lead Up for Women lady, I always have time for you guys. So yeah, with that, well, I think we've got a couple minutes. Oh yeah, we totally do. We've got a couple minutes for questions or however we want to handle it.
Becky, can you put those links in the checkout? Can you put them in the chat so they can just click on them there? That's great information. I wanted to also mention, the one thing my husband and I have been discussing a lot lately is what happens with our businesses, right? So that's a huge piece that we all have to consider, because my husband owns his own business. I own my own business. Neither one of us are partners on each other's businesses. So what happens when something happens to him and he's not able to tell me what to do, or, he were to die in a fiery crash of something, which would be awful. But we travel together a lot, but he's driving around the state more than me. How do I get into his accounts? We've talked about this. How do I get into your bank accounts? My name is not on his business bank account. His name is not on my business bank account. These are very important pieces that you have to talk about, have written down, so he knows what to do, you know what to do, she knows what to do. Everyone knows what to do, what passwords, usernames. Have someone in your company that knows how to run the company, if you've got someone that is doing that. If you don't have somebody that knows how to run the company, what do you have written down that your spouse would know? Some companies are very valuable and can be sold, right? Because they can be duplicated. Others maybe not, right? There's portions of my business that could be easily sold, and portions of my husband's business that could. So do you know the valuation of that? Have you guys had that conversation? So that comes up for me all the time, and we're having these conversations regularly. Becky, did you want to answer on that?
Oh yeah, no, I was going to say that's so important. And the main thing to think about, particularly when you're essentially a solopreneur, who is it who is able to step in? If you don't have, an LLC or a corporation formed for you, your business dies with you. And it's just over because you are no longer living. And so making sure you have some sort of corporate entity on top of those instructions, and even as, that's one thing we don't think about, is having an operating agreement or bylaws for a single member LLC. Because exactly as you're saying, what happens when you die? We're left figuring it out, stuck in the court system again.
Absolutely. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Becky now that we have a few minutes?
Let's see, I'm clicking through the chat. Oh, people talking about creating family foundations. Yeah, that's another exciting thing. What do you want? I think as women, more and more, we want to leave the world a better place than we came into it. Colleen and I are both extraordinarily passionate about helping women and, helping women step up and, lean into themselves. And So the ability to create a long-lasting, charitable effect after your death, do it. Like, yes, that is our responsibility, in my opinion, to do with our wealth, is to make, other people's lives better. Why not? So yeah, that's a really awesome opportunity. And it's not even anything necessarily that, as far as family foundations go, it's obviously much more fun to be able to work on that, like, intergenerational wealth and giving and everything. But that's also something that you can just set up on the back end, that's done after your death. Let's see. Adult son. Yes, your adult son does need to talk about some planning. Possible to have an individual trust, and yes, yeah, you could definitely have an individual trust and a joint trust. It would depend on so like here in Arizona, we're a community property state, and so I do have some separate property. I received an inheritance from in the form of a gorgeous piano from my grandma, and so, if I were to set up a trust for the management of, that piano, if you will, or any of those funds that are in my personal name, then yes. Or, I mean, I've considered, in thinking of my own planning, being able to divert a portion of, my proceeds into something separate, so that, you have that complete control over that. You have those same beneficiaries that you're naming, and then you'd have that joint trust, with your spouse or partner, to manage those kind of joint assets. So yeah, absolutely, you could. It would be, you'd want to make sure that everything all your I's were dotted and your T's were crossed there, because it'd be really easy to make it a little messy. But yeah, you could absolutely have both.
Teresa raised her hand, Becky.
Oh, Teresa, can you hear us?
Yes, I have a question for you. Yes. Could you clarify for me the difference between what you would put in a will and a trust? I think I understood you to say that a will identifies what I want done with my stuff. Then, so I'm kind of confused. Then what would I put in a trust that wouldn't go in a will?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think when I was explaining it that I may have explained that very well. So the trust is, you have essentially taken your assets and retitled them so the trust owns them. And so whereas a will would take care of anything that you own in your personal name. So like right now, your bank accounts are in your personal name, your house is probably titled in your name, your cars, all of that good stuff belongs to Teresa. And so the will says, what do we do with anything that belongs to Teresa? And so when we're working with a trust, we call it funding the trust, making sure that everything is titled correctly. You have actually transferred the title to your trust. So now, instead of Teresa owning everything, the trust owns everything, and it's still your stuff. You're still probably the trustee at this point. You're still able to manage everything for yourself. And, but at your death, Teresa doesn't own anything. The trust owns everything. So we just have, let's say I'm your successor trustee. I just step in and I read the instructions and I know exactly what to do, and we don't have to go to court to have that sorted out.
It's like a whole extra layer of support. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank
and
you.
It can't be
Yeah,
penetrated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you still do have a will also, just in case. It's a safety net, because what happens, us professional ladies, we had a job back there with a 401k that I forgot about. That first $7,000 one that's just sitting doing nothing for me. Well, maybe we would forget about that one. And so we would still need a will in certain cases to pull assets into your trust after your death. But by and large, planning with a trust is planning to avoid probate that way.
Thanks, Becky. We have one last question that Monica asked. She said, when I give power of attorney to one child, for instance, can I delegate another child to do healthcare directive?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Not everybody is the best with finances, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Not everybody would make the same healthcare decisions as you might, and that's okay. You know, it's fine to name different people, because this is about you. This is about people taking care of you when you are unable to, and also about really about you, the child who's bad at finances but great at healthcare and taking care of you. You don't want to put the stress of managing finances on that child. So it's, you know, yeah, absolutely. We can delegate different people. You can delegate no children. You can be like, no, you guys are going to be grieving. You're going to make bad decisions. My friend over here is going to do it.
Yeah.
That's cool too.
I actually have a brother-in-law that is over some of my stuff and not my children for that specific reason. So it makes sense. Thank you so much, Becky. Wasn't she amazing for all this information? You guys, make sure you go back into the chat and grab her links so that you could just schedule time to talk with her. I mean, I think that's the best way to really understand what you need individually, is spend the time to talk with her. Next week, we have Lori Osborne. She's going to be talking about how to improve your SEO and increase your lead generation without running ads and wasting a whole bunch of money on social media. So that's her specialty. She's going to be here next week. The link is in the chat. If you guys scroll back a little bit, you'll see the link in the chat. And I, out of the blue, decided to offer you guys a special today. If you've not already signed up for the August 11th event that I'm doing, this is my first business conference, August 11th through the 13th. I'm dropping a link in here for each one of you to be able to pay for your swag box only, and you get into admission for free, because the swag box is like so amazing. We're packing them up on Friday. My whole dining room is full of stuff. Every sponsor came with like the best stuff for all of you. So I'm dropping that link in there. If you've not already signed up for the LEAP event, I'm going to highly recommend that you do that. This is another level that I'm providing all of my Lead Up for Women members, and you guys have always gotten the best price for any of general admission that's out there. So I added that. And Becky, make sure you go back to the Facebook video and add your links, so anyone watching it on the replay knows what your discounts are and knows what your links are, so they can look at that later. And you guys can share that video with someone else as well if you feel like they could use that support from Becky. And they are really at that, you know, my husband and I waited a long time, way too long to do that. And we're still talking about our businesses. It's been way too long. You know, you need to get these things done, because we keep thinking tomorrow's going to be here. One day you're going to wake up and it's not, or one day you're not going to wake up and it's not. So we don't know when that day is going to come. So like I say, live today to your absolute fullest. You have to be prepared. And I know Stacy has been on here several times talking about getting your documents together, understanding what your documents are, why it's important to have them together. My child said, do not burden us with what we have to figure out when you're gone. That is the worst thing you can do to your family. I mean, my husband's like, the drums go to XYZ child, because they don't want to have to decide who gets them, because they feel that the oldest one will pull rank. And that's not fair. That happens in families. You know, they're like, well, of course I would get everything. And the other ones are like, why would you? You don't even go camping. Why would you get all the camping gear? You know what I mean? So there's things that are so sentimental to these children, like a Dutch oven that my husband has that he got from his father that they've camped with for years. They're like, that's all I want is the Dutch oven, you know? So these things mean so much to your children. I think it's also worth it to bring them over one by one as a family and sit down and say, what would you want? You know, we're in great health today, so now's a good time to do it, and really kind of help them be part of that process with you. So, you know, it isn't so hard on them to have to figure it out while you're gone, because that's not fun to burden them with that. So
not at all.
Thank you, Becky. Ladies, thank you for being here. We will see you next week on August 3rd. Everyone have a phenomenal week. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.